Welcome back, listener. Today I address a grave incident, the recent threats issued by U.S. President Donald Trump targeting India over its ongoing energy and defense partnerships with Russia. The gravity of this escalation cannot be understated. I speak on behalf of those who cherish the principles of sovereignty, respect, and stable diplomacy. Sovereign right to choose trade partners. Russia, via Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, condemned Trump's tariff threats against India as illegal, emphasizing that sovereign nations have the right to select their own trading partners without external coercion. Broader defense of India's strategic autonomy. Russia's envoy to India likened Trump's approach to planting a time bomb, warning that such economic pressure could backfire, portraying the U.S. as unreliable for targeting India's defense and energy ties with Moscow. India's rejection of unjustified pressure. India itself has called Trump's tariff threats unjustified and reaffirmed its commitment to pursue energy security, underscoring it will continue buying Russian oil in line with its national interests. India-Russia partnership remains strong in response to rising tensions with the U.S. Prime Minister Modi and President Putin reaffirmed their strategic partnership, emphasizing the resilience and depth of India-Russia ties across multiple areas. Kremlin has issued a sharp rebuke to former U.S. President Donald Trump after he threatened to impose punitive tariffs on India for continuing its trade in Russian oil. In a statement carried by Russian media and confirmed by Reuters, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov described Trump's remarks as illegal under international law, stressing that no country has the right to dictate another's sovereign trade choices. According to Moscow, this kind of pressure violates the basic principles of diplomacy and economic engagement between independent nations. Peskov emphasized that India, like any other sovereign state, has the full and unquestionable right to choose its economic and strategic partners based on its own national interests, without interference or intimidation from foreign powers. Trump's threat, reportedly aimed at dissuading India from buying Russian crude, was framed as an economic penalty, potentially involving steep import tariffs on Indian goods entering the U.S. Russia's leadership sees such moves as part of a wider pattern of unilateral coercive measures that undermine the rules-based international order, replacing negotiation and cooperation with force and political leverage. Moscow has also pointed out that the global energy market is interdependent, and attempts to restrict India's choices could destabilize supply chains and fuel prices worldwide. The Kremlin's defense of India is not merely about oil. It is also a strategic signal to Washington and other Western capitals. Russia is making it clear that it will not stand by while its key partners are threatened for maintaining legitimate trade relations. India, in Russia's view, has shown diplomatic maturity by balancing its global relationships while safeguarding its energy security. Moscow has long maintained that its oil exports to India are entirely lawful transactions, conducted at competitive prices and in full compliance with both domestic and international frameworks. From a broader perspective, Russia's response ties into its advocacy for a multipolar world where no single country can unilaterally impose its will on others. The Kremlin's statement aligns with its position that economic sovereignty is a cornerstone of national independence, and that violating it undermines trust in international trade. Russia has also hinted that this type of economic threat could provoke countermeasures, creating unnecessary friction between nations that should instead be cooperating on global challenges. By condemning Trump's comments in strong terms, Russia not only shields its own economic ties with India, but also reinforces a principle that many countries in the global south hold dear. freedom to make sovereign decisions without succumbing to the dictates of external powers. This episode highlights the growing resistance among emerging economies to what they perceive as economic coercion from more powerful nations. Russia's criticism of Donald Trump's threats toward India went beyond legal arguments and moved into strong political warnings, framing the approach as strategically reckless and potentially damaging for all involved. In remarks covered by Indian and Russian media, Russia's envoy to India described the tariff threat as akin to planting a time bomb in diplomatic relations, an action that could explode into wider economic and political tensions. This metaphor was chosen deliberately to highlight the unpredictability and self-destructive potential of such tactics. Moscow believes that trying to force India to abandon its defense and energy ties with Russia not only undermines bilateral trust, but also risks reshaping the global perception of the United States as an unreliable and overly aggressive partner. The Russian position is rooted in its long-standing view that diplomacy must be conducted through dialogue and mutual respect, not through ultimatums. By attempting to leverage tariffs as a political weapon, Trump's rhetoric reflects a transactional mindset that reduces strategic relationships to short-term bargaining chips. For Moscow, this represents a dangerous oversimplification of complex geopolitical realities. India's energy and defense cooperation with Russia is built on decades of trust, shared projects, and aligned strategic interests, none of which can be undone through threats without causing deep diplomatic rifts. Furthermore, Russia points out that such U.S. pressure ignores India's broader policy of strategic autonomy. New Delhi has consistently resisted aligning itself entirely with any single global power bloc, choosing instead to balance its relations with multiple partners. Any attempt to disrupt this balancing act, Moscow warns, risks pushing India into a defensive posture, where it doubles down on its independent policies rather than yielding to demands. This could backfire badly for Washington, resulting in a loss of influence rather than an increase. From Russia's perspective, the time bomb analogy also applies to the ripple effects in global markets and regional stability. Targeting India with tariffs could disrupt supply chains, trigger retaliatory measures, and sow distrust among other nations watching how the U.S. treats its partners in an interconnected world economy. Such heavy-handed moves risk causing more harm to the initiator than to the intended target. The warning from Moscow is clear. If the United States chooses coercion over cooperation, it will only hasten the shift toward a multipolar global order where emerging economies rally together to resist unilateral pressure. Rather than isolating Russia or India, these tactics could strengthen their partnership, as both nations unite in the face of what they perceive as unjust and destabilizing threats. This is the strategic miscalculation that Russia says the U.S. risks repeating. India's reaction to Donald Trump's threats has been firm, measured, and unapologetic, reflecting its commitment to safeguarding national interests and strategic autonomy. In response to the warning of punitive tariffs for continuing to import Russian oil, Indian officials have labeled the move as unjustified and incompatible with fair international trade practices. For New Delhi, energy security is not a matter of political convenience. It is a fundamental requirement for sustaining economic growth and ensuring stability for its population of over 1.4 billion people. Indian policymakers have underscored that their oil procurement decisions are driven by pragmatic economic considerations. Russian crude has been available at competitive prices, offering India a cost-effective way to meet its rising energy demands while keeping inflation in check. This is especially important in the current global context, where energy prices remain volatile due to ongoing geopolitical tensions. To abruptly reduce or halt these imports under external pressure would not only harm India's economy, but also disrupt domestic fuel supplies and increase the financial burden on its citizens. Moreover, India's government has repeatedly stressed its right to an independent foreign policy, one that is guided by its own strategic calculations rather than the dictates of any other country. New Delhi's partnerships with Russia, including in defense and energy, are long-standing and mutually beneficial. Indian leaders have made it clear that these ties will not be abandoned to satisfy the short-term political objectives of foreign powers. This stance is consistent with India's historical approach of non-alignment and strategic autonomy, which has allowed it to navigate complex global rivalries while preserving relationships with multiple partners. India's rejection of Trump's threats also sends a broader message to the international community. Major emerging economies will not accept economic coercion as a legitimate tool of diplomacy. By standing firm, New Delhi reinforces the idea that trade decisions must be based on mutual consent and economic merit, not on the imposition of unilateral penalties. In practical terms, India is also signaling that it will continue to diversify its energy sources and strengthen ties with suppliers who respect its sovereignty. This may encourage deeper cooperation with Russia and other oil-producing nations, further insulating India from future attempts at economic leverage. In the end, India's firm response is not just about oil. It is a defense of its sovereign right to chart its own course in global affairs, free from threats or undue interference. Amid the escalating rhetoric from Donald Trump and growing unease in Washington over India's energy and defense cooperation with Moscow, New Delhi and Moscow have responded in a way that underscores the resilience of their relationship. Rather than allowing the controversy to create distance, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Vladimir Putin have taken steps to reaffirm what they describe as a special and privileged strategic partnership. This choice of language is deliberate. It signals that their ties are not merely transactional, but built on decades of trust, shared interests, and a consistent record of mutual support in times of pressure. The public reaffirmation came through direct, high-level engagement, with both leaders emphasizing the breadth of cooperation that extends far beyond oil. Their discussions touched on defense manufacturing, space exploration, nuclear energy, technology transfer, and broader economic collaboration. By highlighting these areas, Modi and Putin made it clear that their partnership is multifaceted and not dependent on a single sector that could be disrupted by outside interference. The message to the world, and especially to Washington, was unambiguous. India-Russia ties are stable, strategic, and not easily swayed by external political shifts. For India, this relationship has tangible benefits. Russian technology and defense equipment remain integral to India's military capabilities, from fighter jets to missile systems. Energy partnerships, including long-term oil and gas agreements, provide stability and cost advantages in a volatile market. At the same time, Russia gains from India's large and growing market, its role as a counterbalance to Western influence in Asia, and its willingness to engage on equal terms without demanding political alignment. By strengthening their partnership at this moment, Modi and Putin are also engaging in strategic signaling. They are showing that attempts to drive a wedge between them may have the opposite effect, pushing them to cooperate even more closely. For Moscow, standing by India reinforces its image as a dependable partner that will defend the sovereignty of its allies. For New Delhi, this solidarity is a reminder that maintaining multiple strong relationships is key to its global strategy. The reaffirmation of ties also reflects a broader shift in global geopolitics toward multipolarity, where major powers seek to avoid over-reliance on any single partner. In this context, India and Russia are aligning around shared interests in creating a more balanced world order. By standing together in the face of U.S. threats, they are making it clear that their partnership is not simply enduring. It is actively evolving to withstand the pressures of an increasingly competitive and fragmented international system.